Trigger warning. This podcast contains descriptions of various abusive situations. Listener discretion is advised.
And parents are literally saying, I can't spank my children because if I spank my children, then they're going to go tell on me. We have now children threatening their parents with this and constantly using this as some kind of a way to get what they want out of it. Like, well, I'll just report you. I'll just call CPS on you. I'll just say that you're abusive or something like that. You know what? That is garbage. Because the Bible says that the children should fear their parents. It doesn't say that the parents should fear the children. I will spank my children because the Bible commands it.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Preacher Boys podcast. Today I'm sitting down with John Anderson. He is the son of Pastor Stephen Anderson at Faithful Word Baptist Church. And today he's detailing some of the horrific allegations of abuse against both Stephen Anderson, his father, and Zsuzsanna Anderson, his mother. He did a full interview on September 6, 2024 on a YouTube channel called Dead Domain, and I highly recommend you go watch that interview before you watch this one, or in addition to watching this one. It's an absolutely fantastic interview, and Jordan over on that channel asked some incredible questions and really let John speak for himself. So I'd encourage you to go check out that one over there. But John actually reached out to me through Instagram a couple of days ago. I spent about 45 minutes to an hour on the phone with him, kind of talking through his experience in the Anderson home and what his journey has been like since leaving. And I really think this episode is going to be powerful for all of you listening. I can't imagine growing up in the household that John describes in this conversation, and I can't imagine experiencing the abuse he has and also finding his voice at such an early age, at just 19 years old, just about a year removed from being a minor within that environment. And the reason John wanted to share on the podcast, and the reason he's trying to get this message out, is because the abuse that John describes is still prevalent within the home, although some of it has been dialed back due to concerns of exposure or, other things we'll talk about later in the episode. There are still 8 children living in the Anderson home, and he hopes to shed spotlight to motivate people who are in the church to take a closer look at who Stephen Anderson and his wife really are. And it's also for the local government officials in the community to be aware of what's happening within their area in Arizona. And so hopefully this is a wake-up call to organizations like CPS that purport to help children. Hopefully it's a wake-up call to members of Faithful Word Baptist Church and all the ministries that are impacted by Stephen Anderson. I hope you'll listen to John's story, and please leave a supportive comment letting John know that you're thankful for him, that you're hopeful that he will continue to experience healing, and that he'll be able to help his brothers and sisters still caught in a really toxic mess. My heart goes out to John. I told him before we did the interview, during the interview, and after the interview, I hope he's taking time to care for himself because this is really heavy stuff. The path to healing is not linear, and I wish nothing but the best for John and his family that are trying to survive a really abusive family with Stephen and Zsuzsanna and the way that they treat these kids. So just fair warning content. This one is extremely heavy, as are all of the episodes on this podcast. But this episode goes into detail about physical abuse involving children as well as spousal abuse. So just be warned about that going in. But here's my conversation with John Anderson. Please listen to the whole thing. I think it's going to be really helpful and interesting to people who are familiar with Stephen Anderson, the NIFB, and associated ministries. John, thank you so much for reaching out and being willing to do an interview. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate the platform to be able to tell the truth about this and spread that to as many people as possible.
I was checking out your interview on Dead Domain, which I covered in the intro of this episode, but people should go check out because it's a really great conversation. And it seems like pretty immediately there's been a overwhelming response of support. And then also, I know a lot of criticism. Your dad kind of alluded to it in his sermon on Sunday. What has been the reaction that you felt the most after kind of coming forward and sharing?
So that actually, when my conversation with Jordan during the episode, that was the first time I had ever actually talked through all of it to anybody. Not ever in a private conversation had I actually gone into that much detail, talked about that many things. And a lot of people in the comments were kind of attacking me or for various things that they misunderstood. And one of the things was people were saying that I want to clear up on is people were saying that I was justifying my dad or saying my dad wasn't a bad person and blah, blah, blah. All I said was I made the statement of fact that my dad was rarely abusive, right? And most of the time he was a good dad because most of the time he was a good dad. However, he is equally responsible to my mom. He is equally unqualified to be a parent or a pastor because any amount of that kind of abuse is too much. But I was just being honest, right? I'm committed to telling the story of how it actually happened. And yeah, that was just an objective statement of fact that my dad was not as abusive and was not abusive as long. He is just as bad of a person. I'm not justifying him whatsoever. And he's just as bad and just as responsible for, number one, letting that happen, number two, partaking in it at all, and number three, his own issues of spousal abuse.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to talk about the perception of your dad and your mom, because you come from a unique perspective versus a lot of kids in fundamentalism, because your dad, for all intents and purposes, is a large name in the fundamentalist circle, either because people hate him or because he has very devout followers in his circle. And so in his online persona, he's controversial, inflammatory, comes across very hateful. It gets news coverage because of how inflammatory some of the things he says are. On the other hand, your mom has a very meek, quiet online persona, homemaker. Like, how much of your childhood did you have an awareness of how the public viewed your parents, or were you pretty sheltered from like the coverage, media, press, like online YouTubers like myself talking about, how they are perceived by us?
So I was very, very much aware from a young age that my parents had a lot of people that looked at them. I remember being a little kid and like constantly having news crews over at our house interviewing my dad. That was for everything to do with the Border Patrol and his kind of activism work at the beginning. And then that segued into his YouTube channel immediately taking off, because at that time he was one of the only pastors posting stuff on YouTube. And with that, I was very aware that as many people liked my dad, as many or more disliked him. And yeah, as a little kid going to church and there would be hundreds of protesters outside, there would be people mailing my parents death threats. There'd be people making videos. And I very much knew that my parents had this big impact that my parents were unpopular with a lot of people. I was also a small child. I was extremely sheltered. I did not see a movie until the age of 10. The first movie I saw at the age of 10 was a Christian movie. And it was very limited, the movies I had access to up until about the age of 14. I did not really have any friends outside of church. I did not go to public school. So I think all of that led to my perception of reality. My perception of the world was whatever my parents told me. I'm a little kid, I don't know better. So I always thought that, hey, my dad is this great man, this great pastor. He's doing God's work. And these are Satan's tools that hate him and attack him. And I think that as a little kid, I loved that. I thought it was so cool to, hey, have these parents, and wow, my dad is really fighting for what's right and all these people are wrong. Because yeah, I don't know any better. I'm a little kid. And then I think that that's something where as I got older, I slowly started to realize that he wasn't the best person, isn't right about everything. And maybe there's a reason why some of these people have some of these opinions about him. But as a kid, no, I was taught from a young age that he was doing God's work and that was why he was disliked. And he very much portrays himself as God in the life of his kids and those close to him. And he basically says it that, his will is the same as God's will, and God 100% supports him, backs him, and his enemies are God's enemies, and etc. And I believed that as a kid. I know that my dad definitely had was a godlike figure almost in my life where I thought he could do no wrong.
Would you describe your parents as like true believers? Like in the sense of, I don't want to get into like the theology of what they believe, but do they believe what they teach? Or do you think that your dad found it as an outlet to express control and power, and or do you think that stems out of what he believes?
To all extents and purposes, I have no reason to believe that he doesn't believe what he believes. The only thing, and this actually just happened yesterday, so not something I talked about in the interview. After that interview came out, a lot of people in my church saw that and they were having questions. They're confronting him. And he held a meeting after the service. What's funny is that meeting was men only. I wonder why no women were allowed. Just that part of that just ingrained sexism, ingrained patriarchy that you have in his church. But anyway, he has this meeting and he said, I have never laid a finger on my wife. I have never hit my wife. I know that he did that for years. I know for a fact that's a lie. My siblings know for a fact that's a lie. And he knows that that's a lie. He did that for years. So being a spousal abuser is clearly something that disqualifies you by scripture. And if he doesn't think that disqualifies him, then why lie about it? And if he knows he's disqualified and he knows he's publicly lying to his congregation, getting up in front of his congregation lying, that is something that he always preached makes you a false prophet and a horrible person. So if he truly believes everything he says he does, then I look at that and I go, why is he not afraid of God? So I would have said, if you asked me 2 days ago, that, yeah, I think he genuinely believes it because I've never had any indication of that. But that right there at least makes me question it. But I would say he probably does believe it on some level. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Because I always wonder that, like, about guys like him that have built a business ministry on controversy. Like, is it just, can I say the most controversial thing, or,
He never seemed to switch up, and he was pretty consistent what he said, and as far as the hateful stuff.
Sure.
Due to, I think he actually believes all that.
I am curious too, and I don't think this was asked in the prior interview, but obviously he has a lot of notoriety, and I'm curious, financially, did your family do well through the ministries, or was it more just people follow what I say? Was there benefit to him having this very close group of very ravenous supporters in the church?
When my dad started the church, he did not make any money off of it. He did not take salary for the first 10 years. And then, he did have a business and he quit his business pastor. My family did well in the sense of we always afforded food and clothing and a mortgage, but we definitely weren't rich for, I think, until I was 16 years old, 15 or 16 years old. We lived in a 3-bedroom home and I was sharing with a bunch of kids. So I don't think it was financial move. Also, knowing my dad, again, I'm not saying things just, I'm just being honest about what type of person he is. My dad does not care about material things. My dad does not care about money. He owns the same few things, has them for years, never buys himself anything. He does not care about those types of things. He is obsessed with control. And I think that control and authority and power are what drives him. I don't think it has to do with the money, because he's not making more money than he could have made in any other field. He's very educated, could have done something else.
Yeah, I was just curious. Yeah, because you always hear people are motivated by when it comes to that personality type, it's money, sex, or power. So I was curious, if it's just the power or if there's other elements. It seems like that's the main driver. I think a lot of people were surprised, and we can get back to that in a moment. I think a lot of people were surprised, myself included, that a majority of focus during your conversation in your interview was about your mom. Because I think people hear dad, yelling behind a pulpit, and then they see a very curated, here's how to make sourdough on YouTube from your mom, and this very mom vlogger, Ruby Frankie style content. I mean, why do you think so many people missed that, even the people you're growing up around? And why do you think there's more of a focus on her than say your dad?
I mean, she was much more abusive, much more often. Like I said, my dad, day-to-day person, is not an angry person. Again, not saying he's a good parent. I'm just saying the facts what happened. My dad would raise his voice at me once every 6 months to a year. My mom, on the other hand, is somebody who was constantly angry, constantly looking for fights, and on a daily basis, between all our kids, probably beating a kid much harder than the legal standard, right? I'm not going to get into the whole argument of whether you should hit a child at all. But the standard that is set forth by the Bible and Arizona state law, my mom went well beyond that standard on a probably more often than daily basis.
Do you think because again, like I said, the public persona versus the home persona seem very different.
I mean, my
Like,
mom's nothing like that. Like in her personal life, when she was on YouTube, we would call it. I remember me and my siblings like laughing about it and calling her mom's YouTube voice, and she'd be screaming and yelling and cussing us out. Then she turns on a camera and she's like, "Oh man, 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 man." It's like that's not the type of person you are. You're putting on a facade. But I think that if you were to talk to ex church members and like people that actually personally knew my mom, they kind of know that like, yeah, like she could be a vengeful, angry person.
yeah. Do you think, because it seems like both your parents do have anger issues, do you think your dad used the pulpit as like his outlet and your mom kind of just used the home? Because it seems like your mom kind of functionally ran the home.
Yeah, definitely. I have never made that connection or thought about that, but when you say that, that's something like I definitely think could be possible. That could make sense. That the reason why my dad was so chill at home was because he felt like he had the outlet in the pulpit. But I also think that my mom was motivated. I think my mom's abuse was motivated by just being an angry, stressed person all the time. I think that my dad's abuse was motivated from a place of, again, being power obsessed and being extremely narcissistic and seeing him as the center of the world. So then when he felt people weren't giving him his respect or were making him look bad or anything like that, that's when he would get abusive. And even many times when he was very physically abusive towards my mom or us, he wasn't like screaming and raving and mad. He would just quietly do it. So I think my mom's abuse was motivated by not being able to control herself or her emotions or her anger. And my dad's abuse was just from being a power hungry person and obsessed with power and obsessed with himself.
I'm really interested in the fact that like a lot of the things your dad does and that you mentioned on the channel when you did your initial interview is it seems like there's a clear connection between his theology and the things he was doing. Like when you listen to him, even preaching on September 8th, when he was kind of indirectly addressing you in a very obvious way, saying, I don't care how you think I parent.
So much like sexism and misogyny in the way he preaches. And it's stuff that is found nowhere in the Bible. Right? Like, but he has that, and that came through very loud in his preaching to where then, yeah, it's not surprising at all to find out that he goes home and beats his wife.
Right. Well, and that's the thing though, is like there's a consistency for better and in this case for worse between what your dad's preaching and what he's doing. And what I found interesting, because I was kind of digging into your mom after the interview and looking into some of her videos. And, you know, in 2018, she released a review of Michael and Debbie Pearl's book, To Train Up a Child. And she said, exact quote, and I could drop a clip here.
Why is this book so popular? I think there are several reasons why this book is popular. It is one of the few books that advocates corporal punishment of children. And I'm not against corporal punishment of children. The Bible clearly teaches corporal punishment of children. However, what this book teaches is abuse.
Your mom's publicly condemning the level of abuse, which it is, the level of abuse in the book, but her treatment of you guys is almost textbook what is taught in books like that.
I remember a conversation with one of my siblings to that effect. We said, like, it's so funny that mom is on this kick of attacking that and exposing that book. And yeah, she is doing the same or worse stuff at home. And I think that the reason she publicly went after that book is because those are people with a much bigger following than her. And she was just looking to boost her following, up her engagement, talk about a hot button issue that at the time people were talking about. And I think that's all. That's the only reason she covered it. Because yeah, I haven't read the book, but from what I know, she is more abusive than what is described in that book. She attacked them publicly for locking kids in the cold. She has locked her kids more times than I can count outside in 120 degrees in Arizona, which very easily, very fast can be fatal.
Right, right. Yeah, and it was interesting reading her critiquing the book. She says parents that read it just want a little army of tin soldiers. They want to turn their kids into robots, essentially.
Which is very much what she was doing.
Right. And then you read her blog, and it's a big happy family. Like it's a group of yes men.
Constant screaming, constant yelling. Everybody's was fighting in my family all the time. There were nice times. There were times when my mom's friendly. For every moment my mom was nice and being positive to her kids, there were 10 where she was screaming and yelling, and all day, every day, she's mad at everyone. She's stressed. She's upset. She 100% could not handle those kids she had. and she had too many kids, and she had too many unresolved issues with herself and her emotions, and she ended up being severely abusive to her kids because of that. We paid the price for her not taking care of herself and her having too many kids.
This raises an important question for me because it's like, and I really appreciate this, and I know that a lot of people have not, but I appreciate the fact that you're trying to give a factual, balanced approach to this, right? Like there's a version of you that could go this exploitative or like extreme version of like, my dad was like this every day, when he wasn't. And you try to give, many things can be true, right? Like you could have some amazing times with your dad, and then you can have, and like you said on the phone to me before we did the interview, one time of abuse is enough. Like, and even if it was sporadic, like it doesn't say he's a better person. But I'm curious, like in the spirit of many things can be true, you detailed pretty horrific abuse of your mom by your dad. To your knowledge, was that abuse happening the entire time you were growing up? Or is it something that developed, as she was doing corporal punishment on you guys, then he's stepping in and now implementing that with her? Like, what's kind of the timeline there?
So I know of the first time it happened, right? These are very vivid memories I have when something of that nature happens at such a young age. You remember it. And I remember it was Easter Sunday, and we were all standing out in the front yard dressed up, and I could hear it happening for the first time. I didn't realize it at the time till later. I realized what was happening. Then looking back, I'm like, yeah, that was the first time.
And the first time you remember
The
it
first
happening.
time of him doing like corporal punishment on her, the same way he would on his kids, of like an electrical cord beating, where it's like, you did this, now you're getting this as a punishment. He did that very frequently for a period of a few years. And then at some point they blew up, blah, blah, blah. I don't know what happened. He was just like beating her practically nonstop for like a day or two, like just a really, really bad fight. And then after that, he stopped doing it. And I know that they like called in some out of state family to mediate, and it was this whole thing. And I wonder if the family member that knew that they called in and they talked to, I wonder if they knew that my dad was beating her, and then they just told her to stop. Well, they told him stop. Well, they shouldn't have told him stop. They should have reported that to the police. They should have done the correct action support. So anyway, he stopped at that. I don't know what happened or what those conversations were. My guess would be that that family member told him, hey, you have to stop. That's too much. After that, he would sporadically like hit her in anger every once in a while. So my guess would be that before that first beating, he hit her in anger. I think at one point when I was an adult, my mom later tried to like press charges on my dad and go against him and all that stuff because she wanted away from him, because she was just mad at him because they don't get along or like each other. She, I think, told me he was abusive from day one, but I never saw that. That's what she told me. I never observed that. But as a little kid, it's probably something that would have been kept away from me. So
Yeah. Or you don't recognize it, or,
yeah, or I don't recognize it.
Yeah. Yeah. I know you mentioned the abuse, and I know you detailed some of this. I don't want to push you through a play-by-play again, but for people who are listening who maybe haven't heard the other interview and this is all they're going to listen to, can you just detail what age corporal punishment began with each child? And was it something that was extremely regular? Was it something that, like, how frequent and like how early did it start with each kid?
So as early, any type of physical punishment started as early as a baby, right? My mom would hit the babies for crying. Not even like, hey, you did this wrong, you're going to be punished. It was just a shut the fuck up hit with like a wooden cooking spoon. That's what I saw a lot. With beatings, as far as like, you did this, you're going to get a beating as a punishment, started at 3 years old.
And the difference between spanking and beating?
There were both, right? Like there were some spankings that would meet the legal and standard of what is not below child abuse, but very often I'd say half or a third of the time, I would say the spankings went beyond what the law says is legal. Because I don't want to argue about like subjective of how much you should hit a kid, if at all, but just going by what the standard of the law, I'd say a third of them went beyond that, because it wasn't just a slap on the butt. It was, first of all over the body, right? back, arms, chest, stomach, neck, and it was done with a folded up electrical cord, like a power cord.
From the time
It
you're
hurts
3
like
years old.
I would say something like that. Probably 6, give or take. Also, another thing, I will point this out. My parents only used that electrical cord for a window of like 3 or 4 years, right? So they were definitely beating kids beyond what is legal, leaving marks, beating kids for no reason. Like, it definitely wasn't just punishment. There were a lot that were for no reason. The electrical cord was a window of like 3 to 4 years, and that is something that hurts so bad because it's dense, so it gets going really fast. It's got the metal center, coated rubber. It hurts so fucking bad, dude. Like, that is genuinely one of the most painful things I've experienced, and I've broken a lot of bones. I've had road rash. I've had it all happen. That is probably one of the most painful things I've ever felt. It makes you bleed. It leaves marks. There's no aiming it. And it would hurt so bad. Like, it would be like, okay, you're going to bend over and you're going to get hit on the back 4 times or 5 times, whatever their push was. And then it would be 1, 2 hits. You're on the ground. And then it would be you're laying on the ground. They're on top of you. They're beating you, screaming at you, and it's going all over. And when that would be happening, right? I remember I was young at that age. Like, that era of the electrical cord was probably like 8 to 11, 9 to 12. And so it's that age, and you're laying on the ground, screaming, begging for mercy, begging them to stop, because it's like, when you're in that position, you feel completely powerless. You are completely dependent on your parents, and then you have no recourse. You're doing nothing. You don't know when it's going to stop. My dad and mom have both threatened to beat you. My dad always says, I'm going to beat you within an inch of your life. That was something he would say a lot when he was talking about beatings, right? Something my mom said a lot. There were even a few things where my dad said, if you do that, I will kill you. Whether or not he actually meant it, I don't know. But when you're laying on the ground, you're getting beaten, you're begging for help. My mom never gave a fuck, dude. And that was one of the most concerning things, is she'd have a little kid laying on the ground, screaming, begging for mercy. And the more you did that, like, the more angry it would make her and the harder she'd go. And these were not just spankings, beatings for doing something wrong. It would be, she was mad, she didn't like the look of her, beating confessions out of us. There were many times that they would beat a kid until they admitted to something, whether or not they actually did it, just because they felt they did. And that's super wrong. Like, that's not right.
There's no circumstance, and I shouldn't even have to say this, there's no circumstance that's okay. Like
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah. That makes you a twisted person. Or those are the listeners that are from the new IFB and you guys love the reprobate doctrine in Romans 1. One of the aspects, one of those things says without natural affection. I would describe somebody like that beats and tortures their little kids and has no remorse, doesn't care. That is somebody that is without natural affection.
With none of that being okay, I think it's important to clarify for people, like, what transgression, like for your dad to be saying, if you do that, like, I will kill you. Like, was that over little, like, extremely minuscule things? Was that something that was regularly said?
I'm thinking of right off the top of my head, that was only a couple things, was if I ever had sex outside of marriage. And he also said after, he said, and if I don't, God will. He was like, you will die. And he wasn't even like screaming at me. He wasn't even mad. It was just like, I was like 14, 15, and I was getting to that age where people start hooking up. And he was very much, my parents had very much a concern. That's something I want to address, is like the timeline of how their parenting changed, because their parenting changed drastically over the years. But they had this concern of us embarrassing them and discrediting my dad. And one of those things would be like, if he felt that if one of his sons ever like fucked a chick from the church or whatever, so he instilled a fear in me of, if I will kill you, and if I don't, God will. So that I wouldn't say that was something that was like thrown around commonly.
It was based on like the most
Yeah.
severe things in his mind, which would be
Yeah.
things that would hurt his ministry, his kingdom.
Exactly.
Yeah, I kind of want to ask this, and I know like obviously we don't need to get deep in the weeds on like theology. I'm sure that's all stuff you're thinking through being outside of it. You know, for anybody listening, you're 19, you were in this till 18, like life is there's a lot of things to figure out, you know, and life is something we're going through that stuff for a long time, figure out where
It's a
we
very
stand with all
slow,
this.
difficult healing journey.
Yeah, but I'm curious, like in it, like when you're in that environment and you're 8 to 11 and you're growing up in church and your dad is saying, you know, or then when you get older, your dad's literally saying like, if I don't kill you, God will. And God was always a threat to you. How did you view God as a kid?
You know, this sounds weird to say, but I very much viewed God as like my dad, and I viewed my dad like God. And I think that was something that was by design of my dad wanted to have this godlike presence. So I thought that God was like my dad. And when I imagined God in my head, I was basically imagining an all powerful version of my dad. And I thought that God was, you know, somebody who just hates gay people and hates people who sin and hates. And if you mess up, he'll kill you and destroy your life. And I definitely do think that God does hate certain things, obviously. But as I got older, I started to realize, whoa, the Bible is so much more about love than hate. And it's so much more about acceptance and inclusion. And Jesus was going to, so it's like when my dad and people in that circle are referring to women as, oh, these whores, these sluts, whatever, using those kinds of demeaning terminology, Jesus was going and hanging out with a literal prostitute. And Jesus's message and Christianity that's found in the Bible is about love, and it's about inclusion, and it's about respect more, and forgiveness and faith more than anything. And I saw that was not nearly as much of a focus. And then that tells you that that's not really somebody that loves God or loves others. They have their own ideas and they have their own bigotry, and then they want to weaponize Christianity to help them with that. And I think it's an utter misuse of Christianity. And I think a lot of bad people hide behind Christianity and use Christianity as an excuse for their wrongdoing. But that is not what Christianity is about. That is not what I'm about. That is not what most Christians are about. Any true Christian knows that it's about love, and it's about inclusion, and it's about faith more than it's about right and wrong and sin and hell and all that.
Growing up with that, with your view of God being a heightened version of your dad, and growing up sheltered to where you're getting their narrative constantly, and then you're getting church members who are reinforcing that, because obviously
Creates an echo chamber for sure.
Yeah. So like, it's an interesting question, right? Like, how do you see the cracks, and how do you see like any other perspective when you're not hearing other perspectives? Was it literally just your internal dialogue where you're reading this chapter and going like, why does my dad skip these verses? Or why are we only talking about this thing and I'm reading this? Or like, did you have anything you were listening to where it's like, there's something else out here? And like, you know, because I know you didn't listen. You mentioned the other interview. I thought it was funny. It's like, I didn't want to just sit there and listen to hate stories on my parents all day, which is really interesting to hear from like a kid's perspective. But like, how did you see those things when so many people don't, who are raised in even less severe, strict environments?
I would say that we have every one of us imprinted in us right and wrong. And I thought that my dad could do no wrong, and I thought that my parents were perfect, and I thought that whatever they said was true, and that was something I never questioned. But then, you know, certain things are wrong. When I'm as a little kid seeing my mom get beaten by her husband, I know that's wrong. When I feel myself getting tortured, see myself getting tortured, and that creates a really, really tumultuous kind of headspace to be in all the time. And honestly, you just try not to think about it. And it's like you want to, and it's like when you're taught from a young age that, hey, your parents were absolutely right, and then you eventually find out that they're wrong and they deal with those wrong things, the hardest part for me and what took me so long to accept it is I really wanted to have parents. You want to have parents. And when you admit to yourself and you admit to everyone that they were evil people that hurt you tremendously and probably didn't love you, you lose all those good memories. All those good memories are ruined. And now it's like you don't have somebody you can go call to be like, hey, I got a promotion at work, or hey, and it's like I think that like as a young adult, I wanted to impress my parents and I wanted to show them I could be successful on my own. And I remember like when I got a really good job, like they were the people I wanted to tell. And then like so then as a young adult, I was accepting more and more wrong with them, but I just kept telling myself, hey, good people do bad things. And then finally, at some point, I had to realize, no, they're not good people that did some bad things. They're really, really bad people. And it's just seeing more and more. And then as an adult, learning things and then reading the Bible on my own and just seeing like, they are not who I wish they were. They are not the type of people I thought they were. And as a kid, that is something that's really, really difficult to reckon with. And I think caused me a lot of issues growing up. And I had a lot of confusion. And as hard as it is now, losing my family, and I've been disowned by a lot of extended family as well. And I'm not allowed to see any of my siblings again. But then it's like, well, as a kid, how do you process that? How do you reckon that? Where it's like, I love my dad and I love my mom, but then I see them do these evil things and I see them do these hurtful things. And it's like, well, does my mom really love me if all day long, because it wasn't just physical abuse, it was emotional abuse. The worst things anybody has ever said to me were said to me by my mom as a little kid. Nobody I have ever been mad at me. Nothing has ever happened between me and somebody to where they have said worse things to me than my mom. And I feel like that's saying something. And that caused a lot of confusion. And as much as it has hurt to cut them off, at least now a lot of things make sense.
And I know you probably don't know the answer to this because you can't read their mind, but why do you think your parents had so many kids if they didn't want to? Like, do you think it's just a theological thing, like we have to do this and it's this thing? Or do you think?
I think that I don't have a good answer for you on that. I think that number one, it could be an interpretation of what they believe is right. Number two, I think that it could be if they're both controlling people, more people for them to control.
There's 12 of you, 12 kids, 8 are still at home. Obviously that's the scariest part of this story, right? Is that you're out.
Safe in that home. The abuse has slowed down a lot. I will say that, but it is still at a point that no child should have to endure that. They are not safe. They are not comfortable. And the emotional abuse is still as bad as ever. My mom demeans, attacks, insults her kids, demoralizes them any chance she can get.
Have you had a chance? I know obviously you can't have contact right now. Have you had a chance to talk to your other siblings? Like, do they echo the feelings you have, or do you know where they stand on this?
I think my oldest brother is just, I haven't really talked. He quit talking to me over this. When I first called CPS, he cut me off. So I would guess that he believes something like my parents, although he does not deny anything that I said. As far as the objective facts of the stories that happened and the details about the abuse of my dad, he recognized, if you call him, if anybody watching this knows Solomon, call him, ask him, he'll tell you that stuff's true. But I think he still believes my parents are good people and they just made some mistakes, did some wrong things. My brother Isaac also, I think that the only reason he hasn't done what I've done, I don't think it's because he likes my parents. I think it's because he wants to be able to hang out with his siblings and extended family. But so I think he's just like staying cool with my parents because he wants to still be a part of the family, not necessarily because of my parents, but because of other people. I'm like, yeah, I lost all of them when I did this. And then, yeah, I feel like one by one, my siblings are going to turn 18, leave, and expose my dad. And how many of his kids are going to have to tell these stories before people believe it? And anybody, and Isaac and Solomon, they probably won't come out publicly. But if you personally know them, if you go to my church, I highly encourage you to go ask them, because they'll tell you Solomon and Isaac.
Yeah. So where things sit right now is you obviously have reported to CPS in Arizona.
I'm trying. They're really not doing anything. That's a really frustrating situation, because like I obviously don't have evidence of this stuff happening, and it's really hard because a lot of my siblings aren't wanting to testify. So I'm trying with that. That's kind of a stressful, difficult topic. But to the viewers, I am doing my absolute best to get the kids out of that environment. CPS, the government, let's be honest, the government's somewhat inept. If the government wasn't inept, we wouldn't all hate going to the DMV. Like, that's right. Like they're just the government being the government, and you have kids that are in an unsafe environment, getting beaten, whatever. And my caseworker never actually even talked to me. I filed my report. She's supposed to follow up with me, never follows up with me, only talks to my parents, never even listens to my testimony. And that's the type of people that the government is allowing that to happen, while they're sending other people to prison for fucking owning a plant.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's like,
yeah, it's insane. And yeah,
I don't like the government that much. I think that's one thing my dad and I do agree on.
Your dad instilled that one pretty good.
I think this is your typical case of government ineptness. And I really hope that my siblings know they can call me if they ever feel unsafe, because I will do what the cops won't, what the government won't, to protect them. And whatever happened to me, who gives a shit? It's ancient history. I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this for two reasons. Number one, to warn the people that follow my dad, because I think there are a lot of good people that he's taking down a bad path. Warn them that he is not the person you think he is. He is not qualified to be a pastor according to the Bible. He does not have the home life he portrays. He does not have the wisdom he portrays, because he is not living the Christian life that he says he is and that he encourages others to live. His life is not one anybody should want or anybody should look at as a model. And number two, I want to get my younger siblings out of that environment. I know the effect it had on me, and I know how hard it was every single day growing up and never feeling safe at home and always hating your life and being depressed and feeling isolated and feeling scared. And I want them to know that that is wrong, and be able to ideally get away from my parents as children, you know, have them taken, and so they could get the childhood they deserve. But if not, be at a place where when they do turn 18, they know the truth about my parents, and they know that they have help and they have support with me. And anybody else that watches this, if you are in a similar situation, or you were in a similar situation, I know how hard it is. I know how damaging that is. And I want to put myself out there. Like, I've been there, and I feel as though I have mostly healed from it. And if you need somebody to talk to, if you have questions, if you anything like that, like, I am there to talk. I am there to support you, because I know how bad that is. I think the best way to get in touch with me, if you are somebody like that, is probably in my Instagram. Could I have you put that on the screen?
I'll link it. Yeah, I'll link in the show notes and put on the screen.
I don't want to like give out my personal number on there, but if you send me a DM, I will see it. On the last video, I tried to read and respond to everyone's comments, and I will say thank you everyone for the positive comments. I tried to respond to everyone, but I did read every single comment on that video. So if you said something nice and I didn't respond, I do appreciate that, and thank you for that. This has made a very difficult thing a bit easier to know that there was that story.
Yeah, man. And I'll just say, and I know I told you before too, like, and I think it's incredible, like, that you have been so open and are trying to raise the alarm about this, but like, also be sure to take care of yourself too. Like, it's, cause I know it's a lot. I know you're getting a lot of feedback, and I know, you know, healing is not a linear journey. Like, there's ups and downs. So like, please care for yourself too. Like, if you need to take a break, if you need to take a pause, like, please do that. And I told you on the phone, and like, we talked for like an hour, I think, the other day. And I'm so impressed, dude. Like, given what you came out of and what you're in, and like the healing and the progress you made in just understanding the situation, it took me a lot longer and it was a lot less severe.
Well, thank you, man. I really appreciate you saying that.
Yeah. I don't want to take too much more of your time. I don't know how much time you have left.
No, whatever other questions you have.
I have a couple people that ask questions from the audience. And I do want to say, just to people listening, like, definitely raise awareness on social about this. Like, I know, on the channel Dead Domain, Jordan put up links to report as well, contact local news. Like, I think the squeaky wheel does get the grease, unfortunately. So like, raising attention
Hopefully some
might help.
Publicity on CPS will help.
Right. Yeah. I would hope so. So I want to say that before we get into
if
these.
If the news wants to talk to me about that, I can tell them my caseworker's name and explain the whole situation, how she never even contacted me to hear my story when I was told she would be reaching out. And that's something that maybe the local news and then the local people of Arizona could ask the questions of, well, why is our system failing kids and why are they not doing due diligence? Because I understand if they did an investigation and said, sorry, there's not enough evidence, but they did no investigation whatsoever. And I would look into the background of that caseworker, see if maybe she has some beliefs of her own and she might be protecting somebody similar to herself.
Yeah, I'll put some of the same links that Jordan did in the description of the video.
Yeah,
so
and
people can
link my
reach
Instagram.
out.
So anybody needing support, anybody having questions, like, I want to be able to help as many people as I can who experience this, because I know how isolating it feels. I know how hopeless and how awful it feels firsthand. And I don't want other people to have to go through that. And I want to be able to help others in their healing journey.
I have a couple questions here from listeners. The first one here is, and let me make sure I didn't ask a version of this already. Someone said, I wonder if his dad lives what he preaches at home. A lot of time these preachers scream in the pulpit, but they have a separate secret life. They said, I wonder if he teaches holiness, but doesn't live holy at home.
So what I will say on that is, my dad, when we grew up, there was an extreme standard of, I guess you could call it holiness. Not really, but like what they believe was, of no worldly music, no worldly movies, and very strict standards to us. Not that I agree with those standards, and I think they did go overboard, but the standards in my home now and the standards starting when I was about 15, they started going very, very lax, to where family Bible time, a kid like being made to read the Bible, right? Then this is for my dad's followers, because you guys believe in these things. There has not been a family Bible time or kids like being told to read the Bible in my home in years. The kids watch any movies they want. They watch any TV shows what they want. It is very pretty much non-monitored at all. They listen to whatever music they want. And I don't think that it's wrong to let your kids watch movies or listen to music, etc. But he at one point said, oh, that was wrong. Still acts like he lives this very separated life. Dude, like, in my home, like, it does not feel like a Christian family whatsoever. There is profanity, there's screaming and yelling and fighting. People are saying whatever, people are doing whatever, people are watching whatever, listening to whatever. So if you are a fundamentalist that believes all those things are wrong, my dad doesn't live by that anymore. Personally, he does. Although I will say, when I was a kid, I wasn't allowed to listen to any music that wasn't Christian, and I was beaten for it. Now I do hear my dad listening to 80s bands from when he was a kid. And I'm not saying that's bad music. Obviously, it's not.
Right. But it's the hypocrisy of what he presents versus what reality is.
Sort of thing. But what's funny is they're still abusive. Now, they're not even teaching their kids, training their kids, mentoring their kids in a Christian way, whether you do or don't like that. That's not even what they're doing. Now they're kind of letting them do whatever, but at the same time just abusing them for random shit and just abusing them because they're angry and mad all day.
Right. I wanted to ask this. I just heard, how was your dad home quite a bit, or was he traveling a lot? Like, was your dad absent from the home quite a bit?
He traveled a lot. He was absent a lot. He always would bring one of his kids with him when he traveled. Gotcha. So I wouldn't say he was absent, but like it was very much my mom running the home the majority of the time.
Did you have a specific moment where you realized, oh my God, I might be in a cult.
I'm gonna be honest with you, right? Like my dad's church is not a cult. Just because of the fact that like people follow him with like a cult-like reverence, and people have a very cultish mentality about it. But with cults are very controlling to the members. You didn't really have that as much, right? Where people could come and go as they pleased. So people had kind of like a cult-like following and a cult-like obedience and a cult-like obsession. And I guess you could call it a cult of personality. But as far as like an actual cult, I personally wouldn't consider the church that. Again, I'm not supporting it, whatever. I'm just statement of right.
Yeah. It seems like, because there's videos and things that have gone viral in the past of like people getting removed from services or like stuff like that. Like that's hit feeds and stuff too. Was it more high control over the service itself, but like he didn't care if someone went home Monday. He wasn't like, they better not be doing this and this and this and this.
No, there was like absolutely no control over church members. And I think that's like an aspect of a cult. Like they have them living together, like saying there was really the people, I will say off the top of my head, I can't think of anybody that was thrown out of a service that should not have been.
Interesting.
Just because of like my dad had a lot of bad publicity. So the people that would get thrown out of the services, it was people that would just come in there and just be like trying to start fights or start trouble. So like whether or not you don't, whatever your opinion is on my dad or his preaching of the church, like it makes sense. Like obviously you're going to throw somebody out if they come into your organization and start heckling people. Now, maybe there's a time I can think of when somebody was unrightfully thrown out, but everyone I remember one time this guy, like, he was just like, it's South Phoenix, so you have like weird, like, crackheads and stuff, and some like crackhead came in with a Bible, and he was like telling people he was God, and then just like in the middle of the service, he starts like walking down the aisle with his Bible, and he said like, I want to pray with you, and then
I think I've seen that, yeah.
People attacked my dad for that, and they're like, he kicked this guy out for wanting to pray. So the dude was like this, like he was like a crazy crackhead that was like telling people he was God, and then just like in the middle of the service starts talking, "Oh my dad, I want to pray with you." So like that made sense, right? Like it was a disruption. And then other times it would be like somebody comes in and then just in the middle of the service like gets up and starts like screaming at my dad. So like whatever you agree or don't agree about them, like obviously those people would be kicked out.
Someone said, first of all, tell him I hope he's okay and that I hope he can actually enjoy life. It's sad when children are brought up to believe that most of the world and its people are evil. They didn't ask a question, so they just left on the first of all.
Thank you. That's a nice thing to say to whoever said that. Thank you very much.
And there's a lot of that, by the way. Like there's a lot of comments of, I hope he's okay. I resonate. I've
definitely seen a lot of positivity. And like I said, I appreciate that. And I did read your comment. Whether if I tried to respond to everyone, if I didn't respond, I still read it. I've read every comment on that video, and I still am.
Someone said it would be interesting to have him talk about how his father handles disagreements in church. They mentioned people being removed, which we already covered, but like in terms of like among deacons or like staff, like, which it doesn't seem like it's a robust staff from what I can tell. Like, how did he handle those kinds of things? Or like even partnerships in the NIFB? Because like I told you, they're independent, but like also Roger and Steven hang out a lot, like there's definite connections. Like
with him handling disagreements in the church, I can't think of anything notable about that. I don't know what to talk about that. I don't really have anything to say about that. Like an opinion one way or the other. As far as with the structure, so they very very loudly said he was independent, right? But kind of the thing is again, people looking up to him with a cult following. So let's say Pastor A preaches a sermon and he personally attacks my dad, right? Pastors B, C, and D, they're all in the new IFB. My dad will then go attack that guy back, or if or Pastor A preaches something my dad doesn't like, my dad attacks them, blasts them publicly, and then Pastors B, C, and D all attack them too. So there may have been no conflict between Pastor A and Pastor B, Pastor C and Pastor A and Pastor D, but they will all blast that guy, attack that guy.
Because your dad did.
Not if just because my dad did. So there was no structured formality, but yeah, people pretty much followed step with what my dad said. I will say, I approached 3 new IFB pastors with this information.
Before doing your first interview.
Some of it was before. I think one of them was before doing my first interview. The other 2 were right after. And basically, one of them didn't respond at all. The other just like didn't really listen to it, and they basically, neither of them said like, I'm standing with him, I'm agreeing with him. They just like would not give an opinion on anything. So I was like, so I asked one. He said, I said like, hey, can I call you? I need to talk to you about a situation. And this was a pastor that I felt I had a personal connection to. I'd known as long as I can remember, and somebody I had previously really looked up to. Said, hey, can I give you a call? I need to talk to you about a situation. His response was, I want no part of this situation. So he clearly knew what I was talking about. I didn't say anything about my parents or anything. He clearly had been warned, hey, don't talk to John, don't be part of that. This was before I ever went public. So I texted back and I was like, well, do you support child and spousal abuse? Do you think somebody like that is qualified to pastor? He never responded to that message. Another pastor I reached out to didn't really say anything back. Third, didn't respond to the message whatsoever. Nobody's like supporting him, but they're very much not giving an opinion because I think that they are waiting to see which way the wind blows. And if everybody starts attacking Matt and going, no, this guy's bad, then I feel like they're going to jump on that side of things. If my dad is able to convince people and convince the majority of the people that that stuff was okay or they didn't do that stuff, then I'm sure they're going to want to still be affiliated with him. So I think that's what that is. Like, no, and it's like I went to people in the church first. They went, and I got attacked a lot for doing that interview with Jordan. There were people like, well, what you said was right, but you shouldn't have gone to Jordan. And I will say, talk to Jordan. They're a very smart, respectful individual who, whether or not I agree with all the same stuff as them, whether or not my dad's followers are all stuff, they are someone that is respectful and is willing to have a respectful conversation on anything and talk about this stuff that these new IFB pastors weren't willing to touch and were just wanting to keep covered.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
even though they all profess that if a pastor is doing something wicked, they should be called out and exposed for that. So people are like, well, you shouldn't be airing out family dirty laundry publicly. How many people has my dad publicly attacked? My dad always said that, public figures should be publicly criticized when they do wrong. And I tried to talk to my dad about this before I went public, and my dad told me to go fuck myself. So he had that opportunity. He has had opportunity after opportunity after opportunity, because as an adult, I would bring these things up to my parents. My dad never acknowledged any wrongdoing, but I was like, yeah, I did that shit. It was okay. My mom, on the other hand, she would like try to apologize for it. Again, not a sincere apology, because she would only say she was sorry because she wanted to still have a relationship with her adult kids. But then she would never take responsibility, never act like it was her fault, always blame others, and then go home and keep doing it. And it reached a point where it's like, you're not sorry. If you were sorry, you would change. You would go take an anger management class. You would take a parenting class. You would take a leadership class, whatever you want to do. There would be actual results, not just saying you're sorry because you want to have a relationship with your kids. Apologizing when you're clearly not sorry is something that's very disrespectful. So I went to my parents first. They had many opportunities. Then I went to people that they will look at as say, oh, that's the right person. Well, Jordan is the person who was willing to help. And Jordan is the one that has a platform that this needs to be shared over.
Do you have any fear in terms of like now speaking out? Like, do you have any fear of like violence now? Like, do you feel safe speaking out? Like, do you feel like, because I know there's a lot of inflammatory language, obviously, from your dad. Your dad's made threats within your own home. Like, do you have any fear of like violence or retaliation against you speaking out?
No. My dad is all bark, no bite. My dad won't beat somebody or have a physical confrontation unless it's a little kid or a woman, so he knows he can win. Me being a grown adult man, I don't think that he would be able to have that same control. There's a reason he targets little kids and women, because he's a little bitch and he's all bark and no bite. And people are like, oh, he's your dad, you shouldn't speak about him that way. Well, he's also an evil person. The Bible says to honor your father and mother. I honored them until the point where they showed that they were not somebody who was worthy of that.
Yeah. Perfect place to cut in him barking from the stage the other day.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? Oh, you don't like the bark? Ruff, 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 ruff.
Like you can take one listen to him, hear the things he says, and be like, that is a very insecure, weak man. That is somebody who is not comfortable in his manhood, is not comfortable with himself, and he's deeply, clearly insecure. And he should have gone to therapy and resolved those issues instead of becoming a hateful, abusive person. So to all the people that think that and were attacking me and saying I was being positive by that, well, that's not what I said. I very much believe my dad is as bad of a person as my mom. I just made the comment that she was more abusive, and most of the time he was not abusive, and that's just true. But that doesn't make him any less of a bad person.
Right. Right. Well, John, I appreciate you adding so much context. I know talking about this is probably a lot, and I know it's heavy memories and there's heavy situations going on right now that are really stressful. And I meant what I said, like, take the time you need for yourself and that journey too. And I applaud you, dude. Like, you're making a big difference. And I think speaking out is really important. So thank you for doing this. Thank you for reaching out. Like, just talking to you one-on-one, interview aside, was meant a lot to me, and hearing kind of where you're at right now. So thank you so much.
Man, I appreciate that. I really appreciate you having me on the show and helping me with spreading this and providing that platform. So thank you. I appreciate it. And yeah, if you're watching, I mean, look into this. If this guy's your pastor, look into that. Ask these questions. Ask my dad's other kids and evaluate if that is the type of person you want leading your church. And if you're somebody that hates my dad, well, I guess now you have one more reason to hate him. Like,